There is a moment in tango when the music stops. Not a pause, a full stop. The bandoneon cuts out. The strings hold a note and release it. And for one suspended second, the two dancers stand completely still, pressed together, breathing. Then the music begins again, and they move not apart, but deeper in. That moment, the stop, the stillness, then the resumption is called a pausa. And there is something in it that is entirely Argentine. The willingness to hold tension, to be fully present in the uncertainty, and then to continue. Argentina has had more pauses than almost any country in the world. Economic crashes, military coups, the disappearance of thousands of its citizens, the humiliation of the Falklands, default after default after default. And every time, something that could be called the Argentine spirit has resumed. Passionate, argumentative, football obsessed, beef eating, mate drinking, Borges quoting, and entirely unconvinced that the story is over. This is Argentina, the eighth largest country on earth, the land of the Pampas, the Andes, Patagonia, and Buenos Aires, one of the great cities of the world, the country that gave us tango, the two greatest footballers who ever lived, one of the 20th century's finest writers, and an economic history so dramatic that a Nobel Prize-winning economist once said there were four kinds of countries: the developed, the underdeveloped, Japan, and Argentina. Welcome back to Around the World in Half an Hour. I'm Ray, and this is episode 7, our first trip to South America. And what an entry point! Argentina is a country that does almost nothing quietly. Its passions are enormous, its politics are operatic, its landscapes are among the most dramatic on earth, and its food, particularly its beef, has been making people rethink what cattle are capable of since the 19th century. It has also produced, from a relatively small population, a concentration of artistic and intellectual capital that has few parallels in the world. By the end of today, you'll understand why Argentina is the kind of country people fall in love with, and also why it can break your heart. Argentina is the second largest country in South America and the eighth largest in the world, covering 2.78 million square kilometers, roughly the size of Western Europe. Its geography is one of the most varied on the planet, ranging from tropical jungle in the north to sub-Antarctic conditions at its southern tip, containing the highest peak in the Western Hemisphere and the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere, both within its borders. The country divides broadly into four regions. The Andes run along the entire western edge of the country, 3,700 kilometers from the Bolivian border to Tierra del Fuego, forming the natural boundary with Chile. In the north, the Andes are dry and high, with the Atacama adjacent Altiplano stretching into Jujuy and Salta provinces. In the center, around Mendoza, they are lower, more hospitable, and famously covered in vineyards. This is where Argentina grows its extraordinary Malbec grapes at altitude, producing wines of international distinction. The highest point is Cerro Aconcagua at 6,962 meters, the tallest mountain in the Western Hemisphere, in the Americas, in the Southern Hemisphere, and in the Southern and Western Hemispheres combined. It is climbed by thousands of mountaineers every year. The north encompasses the Gran Chaco, hot, dry, forested lowland west of the Parana River, and Mesopotamia, the lush subtropical wedge between the Parana and Uruguay rivers. At the very northeastern tip of Argentina, where three countries meet, Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay, the Iguazú Falls thunder across a horseshoe shaped cliff 2.7 kilometers wide. The falls consist of 275 individual cascades, the largest of which, the Devil's Throat, drops 82 meters in a roar of white water and mist that can be heard kilometers away. They are, by volume of water, the largest waterfall system on Earth, shared with Brazil and one of the genuinely overwhelming natural experiences of the entire continent. The Pampas, the great grasslands, occupy the center of the country, spreading 500 miles in every direction from Buenos Aires. This is some of the most fertile soil on Earth, flat, deep, extraordinarily productive. The Pampas are to Argentina what the Midwest is to the United States. The agricultural engine, the source of beef and grain and soybeans that has made Argentina healthy when everything else was going wrong. It is also the landscape of the gaucho, the Argentine cowboy, the romantic figure of the open plains who has been romanticized in literature and music and national mythology since the 19th centuries in ways that bear comparison to the American cowboy, except that the gaucho came first and dressed better. Patagonia covers the southern third of Argentina, a vast, cold, windswept plateau extending 1,200 kilometers from the Colorado River to Tierra del Fuego. It's one of the emptiest places on Earth. Immense flat plains of stony semi-desert, scored by wind, broken by the blue eyes of glacial lakes, and rising in the west to the dramatic peaks of Patagonian Andes. The Perito Moreno in Los Glaciares National Park in Santa Cruz Province is one of the few glaciers in the world that is not currently retreating. It advances steadily, periodically, calving enormous ice blocks into the turquoise lake below with a crack like artillery. Standing before it, 5 kilometers of blue white ice, 60 meters high, at its face, is to feel the scale of geological time in your bones. At the very tip of the continent, Tierra del Fuego, land of fire, named by Magellan for the fires he saw on shore, is shared between Argentina and Chile. Here, the Andes run out of the continent and plunge into the sea. The Beagle Channel, where Charles Darwin sailed and observed, runs between the islands. The southernmost city in the world, Ushuaia, sits on the Argentine side, at 54 degrees south latitude, closer to Antarctica than to Buenos Aires. Argentina also lies at the crossroads of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The Strait of Magellan, the Beagle Channel, the Drake Passage all connect the two oceans at Argentina's southern tip. In the era before the Panama Canal, these routes were among the most strategically significant sea lanes on Earth. Argentina borders Chile to the west along the entire Andes chain, one of the longest international borders in the world, running nearly 5,300 kilometers. The Argentina Chile relationship has historically been competitive, occasionally tense over territorial disputes, particularly in Patagonia, but broadly functional. Argentina also borders Bolivia and Paraguay to the north, and Brazil and Uruguay to the northeast. The border relationship with Uruguay is particularly close. The two countries share the Rio de la Plata estuary, the same Spanish colonial culture, and many families divided by the river. Buenos Aires and Montevideo are closer to each other by ferry than Buenos Aires is to Mendoza by road. And then there is the Falkland Islands, called Las Malvinas in Argentina, a British overseas territory in the South Atlantic administered by the UK, claimed by Argentina. The Argentine claim is based on historical inheritance from Spain and geographical proximity. Britain has controlled the islands since 1833. In 1982, Argentina's military junta invaded the islands, a desperate gamble to distract from a failing economy and political crisis. Britain's response under Margaret Thatcher was a 8,000-mile naval task force that retook the islands in 74 days at the cost of 649 Argentine and 255 British lives. The defeat ended the military dictatorship and hastened the return to democracy. The islands remain British. The claim remains Argentine. The subject still electrifies Argentine politics and identity. Every Argentine passport issued today carries a declaration that Las Malvinas are Argentine. Argentina's pre-colonial history was diverse. The Northwest Highlands were part of the Inca Empire. The Pampas were home to nomadic peoples, including the Quirandi and and Tehuelche, skilled horsemen and hunters. The rainforests of the north sheltered Guarani communities whose language unusually survived colonialization and remains one of Paraguay's two official languages to this day. Argentina has fewer indigenous people than many South American countries. The combination of European disease, colonial violence, and the wars of extermination carried out against the Pampas people in the late 19th century reduced indigenous populations dramatically. The Spanish arrived in 1516 when Juan Diaz de Solis sailed into the Rio de la Plata and was promptly killed and allegedly eaten by the indigenous Charrua people. Buenos Aires was founded in 1536, abandoned when its settlers were overwhelmed, and refounded in 1580. For most of the colonial period, Buenos Aires was a backwater. The Spanish Empire's attention was focused on the silver mines of Peru. It was made capital of the Viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata only in 1776, less than 40 years before independence. Independence came in stages. The May Revolution of 1810 established a local governing junta while Spain was occupied by Napoleon. Full independence was declared on July 9, 1816, Argentina's national day, by representatives gathered in San Miguel de Tucumán. The independence struggle was led by a remarkable generation. José de San Martin, the liberator of South America, whose audacious crossing of the Andes in 1817 with an army and subsequent liberation of Chile and Peru is one of the great military operations in history. San Martin is to Argentina what Washington is to the United States. But his ambition was continental, not national, and he died in European exile, voluntarily stepping aside when Simon Bolivar's forces arrived from the north. The 19th century brought internal wars between unitarios, those who wanted centralized power in Buenos Aires, and federales, those who wanted provincial autonomy. The conflict was violent and cyclical. The strongman ruler, Juan Manuel de Rosas, governed Buenos Aires with authoritarian ferocity from 1829 to 1852, becoming the model for gaucho caudillo. the rough riding strongman who would recur throughout Argentine political culture. The last decades of the 19th century brought a transformation. The War of the Triple Alliance, in which Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay fought Paraguay in one of the most destructive wars in the South American history, was followed by the conquest of the desert, 1878 to 84. The military campaign by General Julio Roca that systematically exterminated or expelled the indigenous peoples of Patagonia, opening the land to European settlement. It was brutal, efficient, and enabled the enormous wave of immigration that followed. Between 1880 and 1930, Argentina received nearly 7 million immigrants, primarily from Italy and Spain, but also from Germany, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Japan. This wave of immigration gave Buenos Aires its distinctly European character. Its wide boulevards, its cafe culture, its passionate arguments, its architecture, and gave the country a demographic profile unlike any other in Latin America. The children and grandchildren of Italian immigrants became Argentines who spoke Spanish with an intonation that still carries the ghost of Italian vowels. The lunfardo slang of Buenos Aires, the underground language heard in tango lyrics, was built from this collision of languages. By the early 20th century, Argentina was one of the wealthiest countries on earth. In 1913, its per capita income was higher than France, Germany, and Italy. It was the world's largest exporter of beef and grain. Buenos Aires was called the Paris of South America. The future seemed limitless. And then, slowly and then suddenly, it didn't. Juan Domingo Perón, army colonel, president from 1946, the most polarizing figure in Argentine history. His ideology, Peronism, is something neither left nor right has ever quite managed to categorize because it has been both simultaneously. Peron championed the industrial working class, raised wages, expanded labor rights, made university free, nationalized industries and railways, and positioned himself as the champion of the descamisados, the shirtless ones, the working poor. He was also authoritarian, suppressive of the press, and tolerant of the Nazi war criminals who found refuge in Argentina after 1945, a fact that complicates his legacy permanently. His wife, Eva Perón, Evita, is a figure of genuinely mythological proportions in Argentine culture. Born in poverty in the provincial town of Los Toldos, she became an actress, met Perón, married him, and became the unofficial but enormously powerful political leader of the Peronist movement. She championed women's suffrage. Argentine women gained the vote in 1947 largely due to her advocacy. She ran the Eva Peron Foundation, distributing money, medicine, and housing directly to the poor. She was worshipped by the descamisados and despised by the aristocracy. Died of cervical cancer in 1952, aged 33. The grief across Argentina was total and genuine. Her body was embalmed and became, over the following decades, one of the most politically contested corpses in history. Stolen, hidden in Italy by anti Peronist forces, returned decades later. She has never quite been buried, in either the literal or the metaphorical sense. Peron was overthrown in 1955. What followed were decades of political instability, civilian governments alternating with military coups, Peronists banned and then allowed, Peron returning from exile in Spain and dying in office in 1974. Then came the darkest chapter. On March 24, 1976, a military junta seized power and began what became known as the Dirty War, La Guerra Sucia. For 7 years, the regime systematically kidnapped, tortured, and murdered anyone it considered a political threat: leftists, trade unionists, students, journalists, priests, and the relatives of the disappeared. An estimated 10,000 to 30,000 people were killed, many thrown alive from aircraft into the Rio de la Plata. The children of the disappeared were taken from their parents and given to military families to raise, a crime that the abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, the grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo, has spent 4 decades documenting and slowly, painstakingly reversing, locating hundreds of the now adult children of the disappeared and reuniting them with their biological families. The grandmother's work, using DNA databases before such technology was commonplace, is one of the great acts of sustained human rights advocacy in modern history. The dictatorship ended in humiliation. In 1982, invasion of the Falklands, driven by a desperate junta seeking popular support, was defeated by Britain in 74 days. Democracy returned in 1983. The trial and conviction of the junta leaders, unprecedented in Latin America, was a moment of genuine institutional courage. Subsequent decades brought the wild prosperity of the 1990s under Carlos Menem, then the catastrophic economic collapse of the 2001 to 2002, when Argentina defaulted on $100 billion of debt. The peso's peg to the dollar collapsed. Savings were frozen, and a country that had considered itself middle class watched itself become poor almost overnight. The crisis produced 5 presidents in 10 days. Argentines banged their pots in the streets and told every politician to get out. Recovery came, then further crises, then the extraordinary election of Javier Milei in November 2023, a libertarian economist who campaigned with a chainsaw as his symbol of cuts to the state, who called the central bank a criminal enterprise, who admired Thatcher and opposed the Pope, and who improbably has achieved the first Argentine budget surplus in a decade, brought inflation down from 211% annually at the start of 2024 to 31.5% by the end of 2025, and won a landslide midterm election victory in October 2025. Whether his experiment succeeds or collapses in the familiar Argentine pattern is the defining political question of the moment. Argentina has a population of approximately 46 million people and GDP of around $826 billion. The capital, Buenos Aires, is a city of extraordinary vitality, a metropolis of around 15 million people in its greater area, European in its architecture and cafe culture, Latin American in its heat and intensity. Its neighborhoods each have their own character: the old colonial buildings of San Telmo, the colorful port district of La Boca, the elegance of Palermo, the finance district of Microcentro, the great cemetery of Recoleta, where Eva Perón is buried, alongside generals, presidents, and Nobel laureates. Argentina is overwhelmingly urban. 86% of the population lives in cities and overwhelmingly concentrated near Buenos Aires, where a third of the national population lives in less than 1% of the territory. The country is also overwhelmingly of European descent, primarily Italian and Spanish, making its demographic profile genuinely unusual in Latin America. The currency is the Argentine peso, abbreviated ARS. The economy is a function of agricultural exports, beef, soybeans, corn, wheat, combined with a manufacturing sector, significant energy resources. Argentina is a major natural gas producer and has enormous lithium reserves in the Andes, essential for electric vehicle batteries. And the chronic volatility that comes from an inflation rate that has been, over much of the last decade, among the highest in the world. Spanish is the official and universal language. Rio Platense Spanish, the dialect of Buenos Aires and the surrounding river region, has distinctive features. The use of vos instead of tu for the second person singular, and an Italian influenced intonation that makes Argentine Spanish immediately recognizable to anyone who has heard it. Let's look at the remarkable people of Argentina. Jorge Luis Borges, born 1899 in Buenos Aires, died 1986. He is, by most serious assessments, the most important writer of the Spanish language in the 20th century and one of the most influential writers in any language. His short stories, collected in Ficciones and El Aleph, are dense, playful, philosophically extraordinary explorations of labyrinths, mirrors, libraries, infinity, and the nature of reality itself. A blind librarian writing about infinite libraries, a man who remembers everything about every place he has ever been. A map so detailed it is the same size as the country it depicts. Borges invented ideas that writers, philosophers, and computer scientists are still working through. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Literature every year from 1967 until his death and never received it. A failure of the Nobel Committee that is widely regarded as one of its greatest oversights. He was also in his later years politically complicated. He praised the military dictatorship, a fact that his admirers have never fully resolved. The writing remains, regardless. Diego Maradona, born 1960 in Lanús, Buenos Aires province, died 2020. He is, alongside Messi, one of the two greatest footballers ever to play the game, and for a generation of fans, the greatest. His 1986 World Cup campaign in Mexico, where Argentina won the tournament, remains the greatest individual performance in football history. In the quarterfinal against England, within 5 minutes, he scored two goals that could not be more different from each other. The first one was handled into the net with his left hand. He called it a little with the head of Maradona and a little with the hand of God. The second was a 60-meter solo run from his own half, in which he dribbled past five England players and the goalkeeper to score what was voted the goal of the century. Both happened in the same match at Napoli, a city that adopted him as a saint. He won two Serie A titles with a club that had won nothing and is still worshipped there today. His life outside football was chaotic, addicted, generous, and ultimately tragic. He died of a heart attack in November 2020, and Argentina grieved with an intensity that revealed how deeply he was embedded in the national identity. Lionel Messi, born 1987 in Rosario, Santa Fe province. He is, by statistical measure and by the consensus of most who have watched him carefully, the greatest footballer in history. Eight Ballon d'Or awards. The World Cup in 2022 finally, the one trophy that had eluded him, won in Qatar, in a final against France that many consider the greatest World Cup final ever played. plays football with a quality that suggests something beyond athleticism, a spatial intelligence, a timing, a vision of where the ball will be before it is there that coaches cannot teach. He has spent most of his career at Barcelona, briefly and unhappily at Paris Saint-Germain, and now at Inter Miami in the United States. His relationship with Argentina has been complicated. For years, he was criticized for seeming more comfortable at Barcelona than wearing the national shirt, and the 2022 World Cup victory resolved that tension completely. At 35, in what should have been his physical decline, he played the tournament of his life. Astor Piazzolla, born 1921 in Mar del Plata, died 1992. He was a bandoneon player and composer who took the tango, already 70 years old when he came to it seriously, and transformed it from a dance music into something that could hold its own in the concert halls of the world. His Nuevo Tango incorporated elements of jazz harmony and classical counterpoint while remaining recognizably Argentine in its rhythm and emotion. Traditionalists hated him. The public came to love him. His compositions, Libertango, Adios Nonino, Oblivion, are now among the most performed pieces of 20th century music. Piazzolla is the musical equivalent of what Borges was to literature, someone who took the specific and provincial and made it universal. Eva Peron, already met in the history section, but worth dwelling on for a moment longer. She was the most powerful woman in South American political history who held no official title. She redistributed wealth on a scale that no Argentine government before or since has matched. She was idolized and demonized with equal intensity. She died at 33 and became a myth that neither side of Argentine politics could ever fully claim or fully escape. The musical Evita by Andrew Lloyd Webber has been seen by more people than any factual account of her life, which means that globally, more people's understanding of Argentina has been shaped by a British musical than by any book. That is a complicated legacy for a complicated life. Che Guevara, born Ernesto Guevara in Rosario in 1928, died in Bolivia in 1967. He is the most internationally recognized Argentine in history, though the internationalism was his whole point. He rejected national identity in favor of revolutionary universalism. A doctor from a middle class family who rode a motorcycle across South America, witnessed poverty, joined the Cuban Revolution, became a global symbol of left wing resistance, tried to start a revolution in Bolivia, and was captured and executed by CIA backed forces at age 39. His face on a poster is still the most reproduced political image in history. Argentina has a complicated relationship with him. He left the country, he was not particularly focused on Argentina specifically, and his legacy is contested across the political spectrum. But he came from here. Argentine cuisine is, at its core, a conversation between beef and fire. The asado, the Argentine barbecue, is not merely a cooking method. It is a social institution, a ritual, a religion. An asado takes hours. The fire is built from wood or charcoal. The grill, parrilla, positioned at a careful distance. The heat controlled with the patience of a craftsman. The cuts cooked extend well beyond steak. Chorizo, sausage. Morcilla, blood sausage. Mollejas, sweetbreads, chinchulinis, intestines, the full animal cooked slowly eaten together. The asador, the person managing the fire and the grill, holds a position of social responsibility. You do not rush an asado, you wait for it to be ready. The sauce is chimichurri, a sharp, herby mixture of parsley, oregano, garlic, red wine vinegar, and olive oil. It is the universal Argentine condiment, served on everything, made by every household to a slightly different recipe, as fundamental to the Argentine table as black pepper is to the European one. Empanadas, baked or fried pastry pockets filled with beef, chicken, cheese, or vegetables, the filling varying by province. Salta makes them with egg and potato inside. Mendoza makes them juicier. Tucumán is famous for its small, carefully crimped version. Each region's empanada is a small expression of local identity, eaten as a starter at an asado, or as a standalone snack, or as a full meal if you eat enough of them. Milanesa, breaded and fried veal or beef cutlet, a direct descendant of the Italian cotoletta alla Milanese, brought to Argentina by Lombard immigrants in the 19th century and adopted so completely that it is now considered Argentine food. The Milanesa alla Napolitana, topped with tomato sauce, ham, and melted cheese, is a specific and entirely Argentinian invention, a combination that no one in Naples has ever encountered. Dulce de leche, milk caramel, made by slowly cooking sweetened milk until it thickens and caramelizes to a deep, warm, silky cream. It is spread on toast, on pastries, between biscuits, on ice cream, inside cakes. Argentina consumes it in quantities that imply a national sugar covenant. The alfajor, two shortbread biscuits sandwiched around dulce de leche and covered in chocolate, is sold at every petrol station, bakery, and kiosk in the country. Argentina's gift to the world's sweet tooth. Mate, the national drink, inseparable from Argentine identity in a way that tea is to British and coffee to the Italians. Except that mate is more sociable than either. It is an infusion of yerba mate, the dried leaves of the Ilex paraguariensis plant, steeped in hot water in a small gourd, drunk through a metal straw called bombilla that filters the leaves. It is bitter, slightly grassy, energizing. Most importantly, it is shared. A single gourd is passed around a group, each person drinking, handing it back, the kettle refilled, the cycle continuing. To be offered mate is to be included. To refuse it is to place yourself outside the circle. Malbec, Argentina's great contribution to the wine world. The Malbec grape, relatively minor in its native Bordeaux, found in the high altitude vineyards around Mendoza, an environment perfectly suited to producing wines of extraordinary depth, color, and richness. Argentinian Malbec is now one of the best selling red wines in the world, and Mendoza is one of the great wine destinations of the Southern Hemisphere. Tango was born in Buenos Aires in the late 19th century, in the conventillos, the crowded tenement buildings where recent Italian and Spanish immigrants freed African slaves and the indigenous poor of the city mixed in proximity and poverty. Its music, built on the bandoneon, violin, piano, and double bass, was initially considered vulgar and immoral by respectable society. Its dance, the close embrace, the intertwined legs, the sudden dramatic pauses, was considered indecent. The Catholic Church condemned it. Buenos Aires' elite looked away. Then Paris fell in love with it around 1912, and respectable Buenos Aires immediately reversed its position. Today, tango is a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage. It is danced in milongas, dedicated tango dance halls across Buenos Aires and in cities around the world. It is a conversation between two bodies that requires absolute attention. Neither dancer can think about anything other than the present moment, the current step, the music, and the person they are holding. In that sense, it is the perfect art form for Argentina. Intense, present, and entirely about the relationship between two people who have chosen briefly to move together. Buenos Aires, the capital, is one of the great cities of the world. Full stop. Its scale, 48 barrios or neighborhoods, each with its own character, means a week barely touches it. La Boca, the old port district with its brightly painted, corrugated iron houses, and the football stadium of Boca Juniors, club of Maradona, of passion, of noise, is the most photographed neighborhood in Argentina. San Telmo, with its unique markets, tango bars, and colonial cobblestones. Palermo, with its parks, designer restaurants, and the literary cafe where Borges drank his coffee. The Obelisco on Avenida 9 de Julio, the widest avenue in the world, where Argentina's football victories are celebrated in scenes of collective joy that make Woodstock look orderly. Iguazú Falls in Misiones province on the Brazilian border, 275 cascades across 2.7 kilometers. The Argentine side gives you more falls, more immersion, more spray. The Brazilian side gives you the panoramic view. Go to both if possible. The Devil's Throat alone, a 150-meter wide, 82-meter deep horseshoe of white water, is worth the journey from anywhere. Mendoza, at the foot of the Andes, surrounded by vineyards at altitude, a city of tree-lined streets and outdoor restaurants that serves as the base for Malbec tourism. And for the more ambitious, trekking towards Aconcagua. The wine region around it, Luján de Cuyo, Maipú, is one of the great wine landscapes of the Southern Hemisphere. Patagonia. The region deserves its own episode, but we will give it a paragraph. El Chaltén and the Fitzroy Massif, jagged granite peaks emerging from the Patagonian steppe, surrounded by glacial lakes, is the trekking capital of Argentina. El Calafate is the base for visiting the Perito Moreno Glacier. Bariloche, the Andean Lake District city, ringed by snow-capped peaks and deep blue lakes, sometimes called the Switzerland of Argentina, is the most accessible piece of Patagonian grandeur. Salta and the Northwest, the colonial city of Salta, the salt flats of the Puna, the red rock quebradas of Jujuy, the Andean villages with their pre-Columbian heritage. This is the Argentina most visitors don't reach and should. Football is not a sport in Argentina. It is a theology. Every Argentine child is born already knowing which club they support. Boca, Juniors or River Plate in Buenos Aires, or one of the provincial clubs, and that allegiance is inherited, like religion, and almost never changed. The Super Clasico, Boca versus River, is routinely described as the most passionate club derby in world football. Argentine football culture, the Barra Brava Ultras, the noise, the intimacy of the stadiums, the technical obsession produced from a population of 46 million, the two greatest footballers in history, and a national team that has won the World Cup three times: 1978, 1986, and 2022. The 2022 World Cup victory in Qatar, Messi's tournament, Messi's final, the final against France, that went on to a penalty shootout after a 3-3 draw, ended 36 years of hurt and produced the most emotional scenes in Argentine football history. The celebrations in Buenos Aires, where an estimated 5 million people gathered, were described by observers as the largest spontaneous gathering of human beings in the history of the Southern Hemisphere. Rugby. Argentina's Los Pumas are a genuine force in world rugby, regularly competitive with the major Southern Hemisphere nations. Polo. Played on the West Pampas, Estancias, Argentina is the world's dominant polo nation, home to the finest polo players and ponies anywhere. Basketball. Argentina's national basketball team won gold at the 2004 Athens Olympics, defeating the United States in one of the great upsets in the history of international football. Foreigners who visit Argentina tend to fall in love with it quickly and be exasperated by it almost as quickly. The beauty is genuine, the food is excellent, the people are warm, opinionated, and almost always willing to discuss football, politics, or psychoanalysis. Buenos Aires has more psychoanalysts per capita than any city on earth, which says something specific about this particular culture and its relationship with its own interior life. The exasperation comes from the economy, the inflation, the parallel exchange rates, the sense that a country with some of the best farmland, best wine, best beef, and most educated population in Latin America keeps contriving to make itself poorer. The Nobel economist's observation about Argentina being in a category of its own remains unfortunately accurate. What Argentina most wants the world to understand is that it is not simply its economic disasters, it is Borges's labyrinths and Piazzolla's bandoneon and Messi's left foot and Perito Moreno glacier carving into its lake, and the smell of an asado on a Sunday afternoon, and the taste of dulce de leche on fresh bread, and the pause in a tango before the music begins again. It is a country that has failed repeatedly to achieve the destiny its resources promised, but it has equally repeatedly produced things of extraordinary beauty. Both things are true, and the Argentines themselves, passionate, brilliant, infuriating, generous, are the explanation for both. Argentina, the eighth largest country on earth, the highest mountain in the Americas, the widest waterfalls in the world, the greatest footballer in history, the most important Spanish language writer of the 20th century, a music born in poverty that conquered Paris, a beef culture that made cattle seem capable of art, and a political and economic history so dramatic that it reads like a novel that keeps refusing to end satisfyingly. Next Monday, we continue through the A's and head to Armenia, one of the oldest Christian nations on earth, a country of extraordinary ancient history, a genocide that the world was slow to acknowledge, a diaspora that has spread across the globe, and a cuisine that is genuinely world class and almost entirely unknown outside the Armenian community. That's next Monday at 7 pm. Please subscribe or follow wherever you're listening and leave a rating if you can. I'm Ray. We've been to Argentina. The music will begin again. It always does.